You know what separates someone who lives freely from someone who lives in chains? It's not wealth, it's not status, it's not even confidence in the traditional sense. It's something far more quiet, far more essential. It's the ability to move through life without stopping at every door to ask if you're allowed to enter. It's the refusal to bend your existence into a question mark, waiting for someone else to give you permission to be who you already are. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for validation, waiting for approval, waiting for someone to tell them that their choices are acceptable, that their feelings are justified, that their truth is real enough to deserve space in the world. And in that waiting, they lose years. They lose energy. They lose the raw, irreplaceable substance of their own sovereignty. But there's another kind of person. The kind who stopped asking. Not because they're arrogant. Not because they don't care. But because they understood something fundamental about the nature of approval and the cost of seeking it. They understood that every time you pause your life to check if someone else agrees with it, you hand them a piece of your power. And power, once given away in small increments, becomes almost impossible to reclaim. This isn't about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. This isn't about burning bridges or rejecting guidance or pretending you don't need anyone. It's about something far more precise. It's about recognizing that your life, your choices, your truth, these things don't require external authorization to be legitimate. They don't need a committee. They don't need a vote. They exist because you exist. And that's the only permission slip that ever mattered. Think about the moments when you've held yourself back. Not because you didn't know what you wanted. Not because you were afraid of failure. But because you were afraid of what someone would think. A parent, a partner, a friend, a stranger on the internet. You knew what felt right, you knew what called to you, but you stopped, you second-guessed. You rewrote your truth into something more palatable, more acceptable, more likely to earn a nod of approval from people who, if we're being honest, aren't living your life, and never will. That hesitation, that pause, that's where your energy drains. That's where resentment builds. Because deep down, you know that you're editing yourself not for clarity, not for growth, but for comfort, their comfort. And every time you do that, you teach yourself that your inner voice matters less than their outer opinion. You train yourself to distrust the very instincts that are meant to guide you. Emotionally strong people reject that training, not overnight, not perfectly, but consistently. They reject the idea that their existence is up for debate. They reject the belief that their choices need to be defended before they're valid. They understand that seeking approval is not the same as seeking wisdom. Wisdom helps you see more clearly. Approval just makes you smaller. Let's be clear about what approval seeking actually does. It fractures you. It splits your attention between what you feel and what you think you should feel, between what you want and what you think you should want, between who you are and who you think will be loved. And in that fracture, you lose coherence. You lose the ability to act from a centered place. You become reactive instead of intentional. You become a mirror instead of a source. And here's the part most people don't talk about. The people you're seeking approval from, they're often just as lost. They're operating from their own fears, their own conditioning, their own need to control a world that feels uncontrollable. When they withhold approval, it's rarely about you. It's about them. It's about their discomfort with your freedom because it reminds them of their own lack of it. It's about their need to keep you in a box, because they're still living in one. So when you ask for permission, when you seek approval, you're not just giving away your power. You're often giving it to people who don't even have their own. You're outsourcing your sovereignty to someone who's still trying to figure out what that word even means. Emotionally strong people see this. They see the pattern. They see how approval becomes a trap disguised as connection. Because yes, we all want to be understood. We all want to be seen. But there's a difference between sharing your truth with people who respect it and auditioning your truth for people who get to decide if it's good enough. One is intimacy. The other is submission. And submission, even when it's quiet, even when it's polite, even when it's wrapped in the language of consideration and care, it erodes you. It teaches you that you're not trustworthy, that your instincts are flawed, that your desires are selfish, that your boundaries are negotiable. And over time, you forget what it felt like to know something without needing someone else to confirm it. Think about the decisions you've made that felt the most aligned, the ones where you didn't ask, you just knew. Maybe it was leaving a relationship that everyone else thought was fine. Maybe it was choosing a path that looked risky on paper but felt undeniable in your chest. Maybe it was saying no when the pressure to say yes was enormous. In those moments, you weren't asking for approval. You were listening to something deeper. And that's something, that inner knowing, it doesn't get louder when you ignore it, it gets quieter. Until one day, you can't hear it at all. Emotionally strong people protect that voice, they honor it. Not because it's always right in the way the world measures rightness, but because it's theirs. And in a world that constantly tries to colonize your inner landscape, keeping that voice alive is an act of resistance. It's an act of self-preservation. It's how you stay whole in a system designed to fragment you. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Because it's easy to romanticize the idea of living without approval. It's harder to do it when your family is questioning your choices, when your friends are distancing themselves, when society is sending you 1,000 subtle signals that you're doing it wrong. Emotionally strong people don't ignore those signals. They just don't let those signals override their internal compass. They can hear the feedback without being ruled by it. They can consider other perspectives without abandoning their own. They've learned to hold space for external input while still keeping the final decision in their own hands. And that takes practice. That takes discipline. That takes a willingness to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to resolve it through compliance. It also means being okay with disappointing people. And this is where most people break. Because disappointing someone feels like failure. It feels like proof that you're selfish, that you're wrong, that you're not enough. But here's the truth that changes everything. You cannot live an authentic life without disappointing someone. It's not possible. Because the moment you honor your truth, you will inevitably bump up against someone else's expectations. And those expectations, no matter how loudly they're expressed, are not your responsibility to fulfill. You are not here to be everyone's version of acceptable. You're here to be the fullest expression of yourself that you can manage in this lifetime. And that expression will not fit neatly into everyone's idea of what you should be. It will challenge people. It will confuse people. It will sometimes upset people. And that's not a sign that you're on the wrong path. It's often a sign that you're finally on your own path. Emotionally strong people understand this. They've made peace with the fact that living freely means living with the discomfort of other people's reactions. They've stopped trying to control how they're perceived because they know that's an impossible game. They've redirected that energy inward, toward clarity, toward alignment, toward building a life that feels true, even when it doesn't feel easy. And here's what happens when you stop asking for permission. You stop waiting. You stop editing. You stop shrinking. You stop performing. You start moving at the speed of your own readiness instead of waiting for external validation to catch up. You start making choices based on what serves your growth instead of what avoids discomfort. You start building a life that's yours, not a life that's approved. And people notice. Not everyone. Not the people who were only interested in a controlled version of you, but the right people. The people who value sovereignty. The people who respect boundaries. The people who understand that love is not the same as control, and support is not the same as agreement. Those people see your refusal to ask for permission, and they don't feel threatened.
They feel inspired, because when you live without needing approval, you give other people permission to do the same. You become a mirror for their own possibility. You show them that it's possible to honor your truth without destroying your relationships, to set boundaries without being cruel, to disappoint people without being a bad person. You show them that freedom is not selfish, it's essential. But let's also talk about what this isn't, because there's a shadow side to this, and emotionally strong people are aware of it. Refusing to ask for approval is not the same as refusing to listen. It's not the same as arrogance. It's not the same as isolation. It's not about building walls so high that no one can reach you. It's about building discernment so strong that you know which voices deserve access to your inner world and which ones are just noise. There are people in your life who have earned the right to be heard. People who've shown up. People who've respected your autonomy even when they disagreed with your choices. People who've loved you without trying to reshape you. Those people, their input matters. Not because you need their approval, but because their perspective can add depth to your understanding. Emotionally strong people know the difference. They know when someone is offering wisdom and when someone is offering control disguised as concern. And they also know that asking for guidance is not the same as asking for permission. Guidance helps you see your blind spots. Permission keeps you dependent. Guidance empowers you to make a more informed choice. Permission requires you to give your power away before you're allowed to act. Emotionally strong people seek guidance when it serves them, but they never make it a prerequisite for moving forward. There's also this. Living without approval doesn't mean you stop caring about impact. It doesn't mean you get to hurt people in the name of authenticity. It doesn't mean your truth gives you a free pass to be reckless or unkind. Emotionally strong people understand that sovereignty comes with responsibility. The responsibility to be clear. The responsibility to communicate. The responsibility to own the consequences of their choices without blaming others for their reactions. You can honor your truth and still be respectful. You can set boundaries and still be compassionate. You can disappoint someone and still care about their feelings. These things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the people who do this best are the ones who've stopped seeking approval, because they're no longer trying to manage everyone's emotions. They're just being honest. And honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is a form of respect. So, how do you get there? How do you move from needing approval to simply living your truth? It starts with awareness. It starts with noticing how often you pause before acting, not because you need more information, but because you're checking if it's okay. It starts with noticing how often you reshape your words.
Not for clarity, but for safety. It starts with noticing how often you abandon what you want because someone else might not like it. And then it's about practice. Small, consistent acts of self-trust. Choosing the restaurant you actually want to go to instead of deferring. Saying no without offering 3 paragraphs of justification. Sharing your opinion even when it's different from the group's. Wearing what makes you feel alive even if it's not on trend. Making the choice that scares you but calls to you, even if you can't explain why. Each time you do this, you're retraining your nervous system. You're teaching yourself that you can survive without approval, that you can thrive without it, that your worth is not determined by consensus, and slowly, that becomes your default. Not because you've become hard or closed off, but because you've become anchored in your own knowing, anchored in your own value, anchored in the understanding that you are the authority on your own life. And when you reach that place, something shifts. The opinions of others don't disappear. but they stop having the power to derail you. They become data points instead of verdicts. They become interesting instead of threatening. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can receive praise without needing it. You can move through the world with a kind of steadiness that only comes from knowing you don't need anyone's permission to exist exactly as you are. This is what emotional strength looks like. Not aggression, not detachment, not arrogance. Just a quiet, unshakable refusal to hand over the keys to your life. A refusal to let fear of judgment override the wisdom of your own experience. A refusal to shrink so that others can feel bigger. And if you're reading this and you're realizing you've been living in approval mode, that's not a failure. That's awareness. And awareness is the first step toward change. You don't have to flip a switch and become someone who never cares what anyone thinks. That's not realistic, and it's not the goal. The goal is to shift the center of gravity, to move from external validation as your primary compass to internal alignment as your primary compass, to let other people's opinions inform you without defining you. You do that by starting small, by reclaiming one choice at a time, by practicing the sentence, "I don't need permission for this," by noticing when you're about to ask for approval and pausing to ask yourself, "Do I actually need input here? Or am I just afraid to trust myself?" By surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your autonomy instead of punishing it. By remembering that every time you honor your truth, you're not just freeing yourself, you're modeling freedom for everyone watching, because the world doesn't need more people who are good at fitting in. It needs people who are brave enough to stand out, not for attention, not for applause, but because they've realized that the cost of approval is too high. The cost is your peace, your energy, your time, your truth, and none of those things are renewable. Once you spend them seeking validation from people who were never meant to validate you, you don't get them back. Emotionally strong people know this. They've done the math. They've weighed the cost of disapproval against the cost of self-abandonment, and they've chosen themselves. Not in a selfish way, in a survival way, in a "this is how I stay whole" way, in a "this is how I become the person I'm meant to be" way. And that choice, that refusal to ask for permission, it ripples. It changes the way you show up in relationships, it changes the way you make decisions, it changes the way you handle conflict, it changes the way you dream. Because when you're no longer waiting for someone to tell you it's okay, you start asking bigger questions. You start taking bigger risks. You start living at a scale that matches your actual capacity instead of the diminished version you've been performing to keep everyone comfortable. So if you've been waiting, stop. If you've been asking, stop. If you've been editing yourself into something more digestible, stop. Not because other people's opinions don't matter, but because your life matters more. Your truth matters more. Your peace matters more. And none of those things can exist fully as long as you're outsourcing your authority to people who were never meant to carry it. You don't need permission to be yourself. You never did. That was always a lie sold to you by people who benefit from your hesitation. The truth is simpler and scarier and more liberating than you've been taught. You are already authorized. You are already enough. You are already allowed. The only signature required on your life is your own. And the moment you stop asking and start acting from that place, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly approves, but because you stop needing it to. And that shift from external validation to internal sovereignty, that's where freedom lives. That's where peace lives. That's where your most authentic, powerful, necessary life has been waiting for you all along. So take it. Not someday. Not when you're ready. Not when everyone agrees. Now. Take it now. Live your truth now. Stop asking. Start being. And watch what happens when you finally give yourself the permission you've been waiting for someone else to grant. Watch how fast your life transforms when you become the authority you've been seeking outside yourself. This is your one life. Don't spend it in the waiting room. Don't spend it performing for an audience that will never be satisfied. Don't spend it small and safe and approved. Spend it true. Spend it bold. Spend it yours. Because that's the only version worth living. And emotionally strong people, they already know that. Now it's your turn to know it too. If this resonated with you, if something in these words felt like a mirror to your own experience, subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button. Drop a comment below telling me what permission you're done asking for. Because this conversation doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of understanding what it means to live sovereignly in a world designed to keep you seeking approval. And there's so much more to explore, so much more to unpack, so much more truth waiting to be spoken. So stay with me. Keep listening. Keep questioning. Keep choosing yourself. Because that's where the real work begins. And I'll be here, doing it alongside you.